What a scene that was, and what a scene that will be the day when we enter the holy place and presence of God. Hard to imagine some of the things visually that are written here, but spectacular it will certainly be. So today, we are starting a new series, and it's part one, the biblical pursuit of, can you fill in the three missing letters, and not out loud, but what letters would you put there? The biblical pursuit of, and so if you guessed the word was happiness, then you were right. And believe it or not, the Bible has a lot to say about the pursuit of happiness. It's such a big deal. It's such a huge value to people that our founders wrote that in the Constitution of the United States. They recognize the unalienable rights of people, life, and I had it down before I came up here. It doesn't matter. The last one of the three, freedom, I don't remember. Liberty, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Such a big deal that Thomas Jefferson wrote the words. Then the Council of Five, John Adams and some others, Thomas Jefferson was on that too, they reworked it, and then it went before the whole Congress. And all these men, oh, by the way, they mentioned that all men are created equal. Our Constitution overflows the recognition of a mighty and good Creator. But they put this in there, the pursuit of happiness. And it's important that, I think everybody, at least it's normal, everybody wants to be happy. I think that's a God-made desire within us. So if you said happiness, you were right, and that's what we're going to explore today. And I'll say one other caveat right now, and that is in a Wednesday class not too long ago, someone pointed out the word joy versus the word happiness, and we, most of us agreed that the two are different, and they are, to a point. But as I studied this in more detail, there's a lot of overlap between joy and happiness. Sometimes they are used interchangeably, as I hope to show you, and sometimes they're different. You can, the book of Ecclesiastes says, your face can be sad, but your heart can be happy. Maybe like yesterday at our brother Dennis's memorial. So there are times when they're different, and times I'm going to suggest when they're very much the same and used interchangeably. So if you said happiness, you're right. But if you were one that said, no, I think the three missing letters are O-L-I, the pursuit of holiness, you've got the right priority. You guessed what has to come first. So my goal in this series, and I think it's a really important one, I hope I can do it justice before God and before you. My goal is to show that you cannot have real happiness without holiness. You just can't have it. We were given consciences that aren't perfect, but they tell us when we're living a decent life and when we're not. If you're going against your conscience, you don't have deep joy. And we look at some of the most powerful people that have ever lived, some of the richest people that ever lived, like Solomon. May have been the richest man that has ever lived, because they said gold, they had so much silver and gold and other things that silver was like nothing. And they had so much of it, they didn't even count silver. I'd like to have a little more silver, a couple pounds of it. But here's a man who had everything, and he decided to explore life and not hold back and fulfill all of his pleasures. And so he did so. And not only have money, though, but he had extreme power, because he is the king of a mighty nation at that time. And so he does everything. He builds houses and buys servants and has lots of concubines and drinks wine, and he just holds nothing back from himself. And he said, it's emptiness, it's vain. And he said, it'd be better to be stillborn than to live here. And you can read it. He's speaking about everything under the sun, not taking into account the spiritual parts of life. So if that's all there is, it's empty. It better be stillborn, he says. And he uses some other examples as well. Because life without holiness is not happiness. So I hope to prove that. And just a little bit on that today, we want to really look at holiness at this time. See its beauty, see its significance. And so what does it mean to be holy? What is holiness? So we'll look at a few verses in 1 John 1:5. It gives us kind of an inkling, perhaps, just a little bit of an insight. 1 John 1:5 says, this is the message we have heard from him and announced to you, that God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. Not a little, you see back here under the podium, since the wood sticks out, there's some shadows in there. A little bit of darkness, and I see shadows in that corner. None! No darkness at all. You can stare at those lights that are too bright right there until they hurt your eyes. And God's brightness and lightness is much, much greater. Not a speck of darkness. In other words, he's pure and perfect and holy and good and wise. And light is powerful. God is powerful. He made light. And so there's no, it doesn't give us specific, but it just tells us, and he is light, and in him, not one little shadow. He's perfection. That doesn't give us any specifics, but that gives an indication about God himself. Isaiah 6:3 and 1. These are, if we read the whole thing, it's seraphim. They have 6 wings, and they're talking to one another. And one called out to another and said, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. One other time. In fact, the interpreters believe that they're quoting from Isaiah in the reading that Scott did, Revelation 4:8. And the 4 creatures and the 4 living creatures, day and night, do not cease to say. Do you think they get bored? I ask myself that. They don't cease to say day and night, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God. Of course not. They're in the presence of the Creator that's unimaginable. He created them for a purpose. And they're living and fulfilling their purpose. And I'm assuming they're overflowing with joy, as they should be, even though we, with limited human minds, think, no, I don't think they are at all. I think they love the honor, the position they have, and the closest to God that they have. But they're crying out, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God, the Almighty, who was and is and who is to come. That means he's timeless. He was and he is now and he will be. And he never changes. But our focus is going to be on holy, holy, holy. It is the only word describing God back to back 3 times. No other word. You are never going to read, God is love, love, love. God is justice, justice, justice. Kind, kind, kind. Wise. He's all those things. He's the definition of love. He sets the standard for kindness. But this is the only word in the entire Bible used 3 times to describe God the Father. Holy, holy, holy. It's significant, used in the Old and the New Testament. So what is holy? We talked a little bit about it in our 1 Peter class. And some of you that study with me on the side remember what what was said. And you said, well, holy means to be separate, right? It says in 1 Peter 2:9 that he delivered us from the domain of darkness into the marvelous kingdom of light. He separated us. But it also means different. It means so unique. In God's case, there's nothing to compare at all. Well, he's he's not kind of like anything. No, there's nothing like God. Incredible. And the common response when people see him, or they don't see him, but when they talk to him, Isaiah's fear, or Moses when he approaches the burning bush. And if you read in Exodus 2, I believe it is, I forget sometimes, he's full of fear. It's overwhelming to a human being because he's so spectacular. And you've seen spectacular things, whether it's the Grand Canyon or waterfalls or a sunset. We're humans, and we don't even have a way to describe how holy he is and how different. But I want to point out one other thing, that I didn't go far enough in the 1 Peter class, because it doesn't just mean different, because think back to high school. Did you have some weird people? They chose to be weird. The way they had their hair, whatever it was, spiky colored orange, or the way they dressed, or the way they chose to be weird. And weird is separate and weird is different, but weird is not holy. Not holy. Holy means much more. It demands righteousness and goodness and the attributes of God. It's way above just being different and separate. It's those things with a whole lot of incredible attributes poured in and mixed in with it. And our God is holy, holy, holy. In Isaiah 46:9, God is speaking. He says, remember the former things long past, things that happened a long time ago? For I am God, and there is no other. No other. There are fairy tales and mythological gods, but there is no other. He says, I am God, and there is no one like me, he says. No one. He is separate and different, but incredible and powerful and good and loving, and every good attribute there is not only from God, but is part of his character. Moving on now, he's holy. He stands out. That's what holy people do. We stand out because we are different, not because we're weird, but because we choose different values that go against the grain, go against society's values, and it makes us stand out. They may call us weird, but we're holy. So he's talking about how there's no one like him. In verse 10, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things which have not been done, saying, my purpose will be established, and I will accomplish all my good pleasure. So this is one of the things that gives us the confidence to devote our entire life to God, because holiness, if you look it up, you're going to get a definition of about 1,000 words in a good Greek lexicon. But boiled down, holy means, for a human being, dedicated to the service of God. I kind of like to think, well, not only dedicated to the service of God, which absolutely is required, but living and acting like his offspring. Because in the world of nature, a baby fox acts like its parents, or an otter like its parents, or an eagle like its parents. God is our Father, and I think not only dedicated to his service, but imitating him to the best of our human ability. being an ambassador, being as much like him as we can. But one more thing. He's holy, all right. But so is this. This is called the Holy Word. One time in the Old Testament, we call it the Holy Bible. It says so right there, even holy, because it too, powerful, unique and distinct, but full of righteousness and goodness. And when God says he declares the end from the beginning, that's exactly what made this stand out. There's none like it. You've heard me say it not long ago when we looked at the prophecy of Tyre. But we had the Lord's Supper. Andrew, appreciated all you had to say. Romans 8, so powerful. But the Lord's Supper it looks back to the price that Jesus paid, the crucifixion that he went through. Well, in the book of Psalms 22 that we looked at a year or so ago, the book of Psalms predicts the crucifixion of the Messiah. But what makes it so amazing, declaring the end from the beginning, is Psalms 22 was written 500 years before crucifixion existed. And yet it says, they pierced my hands and my feet. I'm surrounded by dogs and ox of Bashan. And anyway, it just goes into the great detail, declaring it before, not even before it happened, declaring the crucifixion before it was imagined. And so, for those that are skeptical that you may know, or that are watching, or maybe in our room today, I just say, listen, is your soul, is the potential of an existence of God important, and eternal life important to you? Then put this to the test alongside every other religious book, the Koran, the Book of Mormon, the writings, the New World Translation by the Jehovah's Witnesses. None of them do what this does. Not a book in the world. It's holy. It's different. It's powerful. It's good. All right. The holiness of Jesus, it overpowered things that were unclean. Now here, I've read it a bunch of times, right? But it never occurred to me till I'm working on this, that here's a woman, Mark 5:25, a woman who had a hemorrhage for 12 years. Spent all of her money on physicians, and she only got worse, not better. Bleeding for 12 years. And had endured much at the hands of many physicians, and had endured. That means didn't work, unpleasant, harmful. And had spent all that she had and was not helped at all, but rather grown worse. Did you know that the book of Leviticus in chapter 15, verses 25 through 27, it says that a person that has a discharge of blood is unclean. You know how that impacted her life? If back under the old law, if you were unclean, you couldn't worship. Not with your brothers and sisters. You couldn't go to the temple. You couldn't even go to the synagogue, because it says in Leviticus 15 that if you were unclean, you still had a discharge. If you sat on something, it was unclean. And if anyone else sat on it, they were unclean. Uncleanliness spread. It was powerful and terrible. So what did she get to do? I don't know how she got her food. But she was unclean, and they weren't to touch her. But Jesus did. Never realized the significance of that before, because his holiness overpowered uncleanliness. Normally, being unclean overpowers the diseases spread from an unclean person to a diseased person. An unclean person will discharge them. They push the bad stuff. But Jesus' holiness is so great that he overpowered it. And 27, after hearing about Jesus, she came up in the crowd behind him and touched his cloak, for she thought, if I just touch his garment, I will get well. Immediately, the flow of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed, her affliction. So Jesus went against what it says. They weren't not touching an unclean person because she wasn't unclean. She was clean. As soon as they touched, she was clean. And he told her that her faith healed her. And you know other examples like Luke 7:14. The only son of the widow in Nain had died. And now she's a widow and all alone. And Jesus came up and touched the coffin, and the bearers came to a halt. And he said to the dead man, after touching the coffin, people were limited on how many were supposed to touch a dead person because it made them unclean. But he said, after touching the coffin, young man, I say to you, arise. And he did. And so Jesus overcame death because of his holiness and his power. And then the last one we'll look at, and a leper in Matthew 8:2 came to him and bowed down before him and said, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I am willing, be cleansed. And immediately the leprosy was cleansed. You weren't supposed to touch a leper, but Jesus' holiness overcame that too, and he wasn't a leper anymore. Holiness, God's holiness. 1 Peter 1:15 says, but like the Holy One who called you, be holy yourselves in all your behavior, because it is written, you should be holy, for I am holy. We were created to be holy. That part of the plan for God's people to be holy. In Genesis 1:27, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And we know from Luke 24:39 that God is a spirit, and a spirit doesn't have flesh and bones. So the physical you is not made in the image of God because he doesn't have flesh and bone. Your inner person is, your spirit. And God is holy. He says we are to be holy, and that's the plan for all human beings. To be righteous and unique and different and separated from the ugliness of the world, living a different kind of life. Again, I haven't polled you. I like to do that sometime, but do you picture yourself as holy? You know, if you read Philippians, the beginning of Philippians, or Ephesians, or Colossians, it calls the Christians in those different cities saints. And it just means holy ones. Not someone who's done a bunch of miracles, but a saint is just someone like us, separated to serve God, devoted to him in righteousness as much as within us, power. And you are holy if you're a Christian. Holy. Some of you know that, but that's significant. So as I've been working on this, I started about a year ago, but, you know, a little work here. I've tried to say, when thoughts would come into my mind, it doesn't matter, anger, it doesn't matter what they are, or thinking about certain responses, and I say, well, Mike, is that holy? Is your anticipated response the same that God would have? And throughout the day, I try to ask myself now, are you holy today? Are you different and unique and serving God? But you, if you are a Christian, then you are a holy one by design. Here's one that is powerful and significant. Hebrews 12:14. Pursue peace with all people and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord. So this is written to Christians. We see two requirements that are necessary for a Christian to be saved, to see the Lord, or to even see the kingdom, as Jesus talks about in John chapter 3. To see the Lord, to see the kingdom, is to be saved. That's what this is talking about. Two requirements. One is to pursue peace with all people and to pursue holiness. That word pursue, what should I do first here? That word pursue. Remember Acts 9, when Paul is ravaging the church? It may be 8 where it says he's entering homes and dragging out men and women and throwing them in prison. We know he did more than that. We know he tortured them. He said, I forced them to blaspheme. I was a violent aggressor, he says, in other places in Acts. Remember that? And the church scattered, ran for their lives, and the church spread and the word spread. Because as Christians ran for their lives, they preached Jesus. Jesus intervenes in Acts 9, near the beginning. And he calls out to Saul, that was his name at the time, who became the Apostle Paul. Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Same exact word, same exact word. This says, pursue peace. It could as easily say, persecute peace. Persecute holiness. The fancy definition out of the lexicon is moved rapidly and decisively toward an objective. Hasten, run, press on. That's the attitude towards holiness that God's people are to have. I will pursue it. I will persecute it. I will chase it down. I will make it mine as best as I can with God's help. That's pursuing peace and holiness. And so even that peace part right there, peace, pursuing it with great intensity, is critical to being saved. Matthew 5, verse 6, Jesus is speaking. He says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. In my lifetime, I remember one of the greatest famines, but I hear that many more have gone on, was in Ethiopia. Do you remember that when the United States was sending money? Private collections were taken and donated to the people in Ethiopia, and they were a drought and dying. And even today, there are droughts in parts of the world. And I read that from droughts and famine, that tens of millions have died in the last century, tens of millions from famine. In India, there was one so bad that people were jumping in the river to drown to death because it was so painful to slowly starve to death without, they thought, any hope of food. But they didn't know Yahweh God. So these people, when they're starving, there's only one thing on their mind. If you're dying of thirst, and lots of stories about that. I read some in World War I where these the Allies were chasing the Turks out of, I can't remember the name of the town anymore, but they've been pushing so hard and chasing the Turks out that they got way ahead of their camel train that had the water. It's hot in that country, and they had no water. And they got swollen lips, red eyes, severe headache, fainting, dizziness. Hundreds died from thirst. And they had to reach that town. Starts with an S. I don't remember what it is. And they do it. They push into town, and there's a well there. And they take turns with the worst off men going first. And if they hadn't made the water that night, then thousands would have died. They were just in real bad shape. So what was on their mind? It wasn't what order they were in line, whether they were marching. It probably wasn't anything to do with their favorite hobby. Even how they would sleep that night. I needed water. They thirsted for it. Nothing else was on their mind. We're going to take that town to get to the wells, to get the water. I have to have water. That's the idea. To hunger and thirst for holiness. Mine says, that's righteousness right there. Hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Righteousness and holiness, almost the same thing. Righteousness means doing what's right in God's sight. And holy is serving God with all of our ability. And they're very much synonyms. They're not identical. They're different words. But being righteous is being holy. Being holy is being righteous. They're very closely related. So hungering and thirst for that, it's the thing that's the most intensely on my mind. We have to have that. That's the idea that Jesus says. And what's the result? If we hunger and thirst for it, we've got to have it. We'll be satisfied. In Psalms 23, David said, Yahweh, that's the word he uses, Yahweh is my shepherd. I shall not want. He's saying as Yahweh's the shepherd, all of his important needs are satisfied. Satisfied. They're meant. And if we hunger and thirst for righteousness, not only will we have all the basic needs, but we will have happiness as well. Because the word blessed, right there, I will highlight it in just a second. It means happy. The Greek word is makarios. If you look it up, there's other things that it does include divine pleasure. It's pleasing to God when we do this. But the main concept behind the word blessed here and in other places throughout the Beatitudes, it's happy. Happy are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Joy. That's what we want. Many people, even sometimes we, forget how to achieve happiness. But especially the people in the world that don't know Jesus yet, they try everything because they have no clue how to fill the void that they have, how to get that happiness. They don't know. But we do, and we can share that with them. Blessed, I mentioned that already. It means fortunate or happy because of circumstances. Now, joy is independent of circumstances. Happiness sometimes is dependent upon it, but because of the circumstances, happiness. And the second one is similar, being especially favored, blessed, fortunate, happy, and privileged. Every command in the Bible, even the ones that we don't enjoy, and that may differ from Christian to Christian, but every command in the Bible has a purpose. One purpose that's the same, and that's to bless us, to make life better, to make us more like God, to make our lives happier, to make them more stable, to win others to Christ. Every command in the Bible is for our good, not one is for our harm. And we are blessed when we hunger and thirst for doing what's right in God's sight, for righteousness. So next week, we are going to look at what is the conscience, because it plays a significant part in the happiness that we want to have, or that we do have. Many of you have it, and it shows. But we're going to look at the conscience, and we're going to try to answer these questions and others. How does the conscience work? And is the conscience trustworthy? Can you train the conscience? Can it be ruined? And how does it affect our happiness? That'll be our study for next Sunday, if God allows me to return, or if you do too. But for today, just the idea that if you're a Christian, you are holy, and we can grow in that, and we can hunger and thirst for more righteousness. But you are chosen by God, separated by God. You are holy in the sight of God. You're His children. We are the holy ones. If you're not a holy one, it is incredible that anybody can be. The man who claims to be the worst, and he was inspired by God, who claimed to be the worst sinner that ever lived, Saul, who became Paul, the worst sinner that ever lived, became holy and full of joy. That's ours. Choose to be holy today if you're not already. Choose to be a child of God. We're going to stand and sing the song of invitation. If you'd like to become a Christian, or you just have a spiritual need, please let us know what that is.